Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Apparently and evidently, all public holidays are aiming to fall specifically on Mondays, therefore cutting off our rhythm of the module. So I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but I would rather do the live lectures with some of you actually listening to me than me myself speaking, looking at the camera. So this is a very exciting week, as you might have realized already if you had your seminars, because this week we were looking at a very complex, at the same time very popular topic, leadership. This is nothing new for you because you have your own idols. There are leaders that you follow very closely on social media across industries. So it could be somebody from IT, from airlines, from entertainment, lifestyle industry. At the same time, some of you are following somebody from arts, sports, and obviously even from the public sector for some of you. So this is quite a complex concept. One thing I would like to do as we begin today's lecture, this is again, it's a recording, pretty similar to last week's, but obviously next week we'll be back live on Monday. So just follow your timetable. I suspect there are no further holidays, at least the ones that fall on Mondays, for the rest of the season. So we'll be finishing off our semesters pretty smoothly, hopefully. So one thing I would like to do, first of all, is there is no shortcut to this topic. And I would not pretend to say that after the end of this lecture, you are going to be leadership experts, or the fact that you are actually going to be or become a leader. Because, looking back in the UK when I was teaching, there's a module called Developing Leadership. It was for final year undergraduate students, just like you guys are in your first year. And the module actually ran for 2 semesters, back to back, non-stop. But what we have this semester together is 1 week, this very lecture, and 2-hour seminars that most of you have had already. And some of you will have the rest of your seminars tomorrow and Friday. But I hope that you enjoyed the content of the seminar exercises, and just the way I've designed the activities for this week was quite difficult, really, just to fit the essential components and topics of leadership in a 2 hours slot. And I had sent you emails just to make sure that you understand the importance of this topic. So I'm sure you have also read the coursework, the second coursework, Instructions, which is also specifically looking at leadership. So this is the topic for your second coursework. So it will be astonishing if the attendance is actually low in some seminar groups. So please do go and attend, because you need this topic for your second coursework. If not, at least for your own interest, because I'm sure at some level, all of us are leaders deep down. In some contexts, we try to become followers, but in some other contexts, we might have to step up and be the leader as it is required. So again, so disclaimer is no promises that you are going to be leader at the end of the lecture, but one thing for sure, one thing you need to do, which is also something that is going to distinguish you from others who are not studying leadership, who are not studying business administration, is the use of keywords, technical words and keywords that you use in daily life, also in the seminars. Please stop talking in simple terms, in non-sophisticated language, because over the weeks, as you might have to scroll through all the lecture slides and seminar slides, lots of theories and technical terms that we have used and learned. We looked at entrepreneurship, new business formation, internal business environment, external ones. We learned quite a few models also. So when you're talking, try to incorporate and involve these keywords in your sentences. That would prove, in a way, which sort of evidence that you've got a training in business management. Otherwise, you are going to speak like every other Tom, Dick, and Harry who may not have had the luxury of studying business management. So again, so one of the purposes of this particular lecture will be to introduce you to some concepts, some technical terms, even if you're not an expert, but you should know these terms and keywords exist in the literature of leadership. That is one of the goals that I have today. And as I said, it's very complex topics. So looking at the slide, this is an attempt, shall we say, to understand what is a leadership and who is a leader fundamentally, regardless of sector and industry. As I said, it could be somebody from art, somebody from sports, somebody from music, and of course from industry, as we know. In the seminars, I've also given you examples and cases of individuals who are not always from business management. So they might be from politics, they might be from arts and sports. So you may have your own examples. So who is your favorite leader, for example? Take a moment and ask yourself, who is your favorite leader so far? Is there somebody who you follow regularly, who inspires you, who sort of pushes you internally, innately, psychologically to go for that extra length of doing something? So it's just the extra bit that we always push for in our lives, which makes us different than others. Sometimes we are self-motivated, at other times we need a little bit of push and validation from outside. But having an idol, having a leader also helps, because you might want to walk on their path. That's one benefit of having an idol. And this is one of the simplest definition here given by Fiedler, published in 1995. The leader is a person who is appointed or elected or even informally chosen to direct and coordinate the work of others in a group. And I took some time to decide which leadership definition should we be looking at, because there is just so many. If you go online and just type and search for definitions of leadership, conceptualizing leadership, I have published quite a lot of articles on leadership that you will find. But this one is really sort of captures the essence of the concept of who is a leader, really. So, so they might be appointed formally, they might be elected for someone, let's say it's a general election, or you are elected to be the managing director or board of director, or you're informally chosen just for a leadership role in a community. It could be a variety of different ways. There are very different ways how leader is appointed. But again, there are theories that will tell you that these are the 20 roles and responsibilities of a leader. But then again, fundamentally, it comes down to directing and coordinating the work of others in a group. These others, if you look at the word others, work of others, we call them followers. So leaders and followers. Try not to use the words leaders and managers in the same sentence, because all managers are leaders, but not all leaders are managers. This is a quotation. And it's true, because one of the job responsibilities of a manager, or one of the managerial roles, is to lead, is to guide, is to coordinate, is to direct, is to mentor, is to develop others, instruct others. But you don't need to have a formal managerial position to exercise your leadership traits and abilities. You can still be a leader without a formal title. One of the books recent, I think in the past 5 years, that was written on this particular topic, I quite liked it personally. It's called Leading Without a Title. Okay, Leading Without a Title. I'll just add the link on LMS. Try to see if you can get a copy of it by Robin Sharma. And it just provides some very interesting perspectives that we don't really come across very often, because leadership is very often perceived as something very formal, something very institutionalized, but it doesn't have to be all the time. That's a leader. But then the process of leadership, so if you look at the slide again, the process of influencing the behavior of individuals or groups towards the achievement of organizational goals. And I think this is a very good definition, again, by Farnham, without getting too much into details, because two concepts that comes with leadership very often. Number one, power, the concept of power, a powerful leader, a powerful person, powerful individual. And the second is the level of influence, or the degree of influence that a particular person might have in an organization, or a particular influence over community, over a group of stakeholders, or over the organization. So power and influence are not always necessarily the same, because influence is a bit more subtle. Most international negotiators, international consultants have got this importance on negotiation, because when you're looking at influence, you're trying to influence the attitude, the perception, the personality, the behavior of individuals, rather than just trying to influence the outcome. Yes, consequently, the outcome will change, because you're trying to change the process, how individuals are going to arrive at that point, from point A to point B. So you might have let's say, a state power, government power. So in that case, all you do is say something and it's done, because it's a one-way street, it's a top-down approach. But if you're influencing somebody in the process, you're sort of trying to get through the whole process from A to B. The journey itself also matters. Because if you're trying to influence someone's personality, perception, behavior, and beliefs, that's difficult, that's deep. So influence and power, these two concepts come hand in hand, or go hand in hand when you talk about leadership, the process of leadership. And some of the terms that are associated in this context are leaders' personal qualities, behaviors, certain types of behavior, leadership styles, because that differs from one person to the other. Again, you cannot generalize the leadership style of one person based on, let's say you take a leader from sports industry or from IT industry, their leadership style might not match the leadership style of their competitor necessarily. And it's not just always about the person, but also about the industry and the context and the situational factors. Situational factors also influences the way leaders sometimes act, behave, and also guide others. And styles and decisions adopted by leaders. So these are some of the sort of words that are associated when we discuss leadership. And some of the other topics in leadership, I'm just trying to introduce you to the whole concept of leadership bit by bit. And towards the end, we'll also look at some of the theories and concepts involved. So first is the positional power. As I was saying, typically when you talk about leadership, we tend to understand this is a very formal role of a person. And it's quite institutionalized rather than personal power or personality power as such. So a person who is having a higher position tends to have more power. It's tricky because sometimes you might have somebody who is the CEO, might just be a figurehead. The real decisions might be taken by someone else. That happens a lot. Even the founder of the company may not be the chairman of the board or the CEO. They might want to do something else. Let's say managing director of operations, because that's what they enjoy doing. That's where they believe they can create the highest value. So instead of them sitting at the top at the realm, they might decide to put somebody else as a figurehead, taking or at least announcing the decisions which they were not responsible for directly. But typically, when you look at the hierarchy of the organization, higher position typically refers to higher power. Not necessarily influence, because as I said, power and influence are quite different. And when you look at leader, we look at the characteristics or features. And then every time we talk about leaders, we have to talk about followers. That's essential. So every time we talk about managers, use the word subordinates. Yeah, subordinates, the individuals that you are trying to manage. You might have 20 individuals that you are supporting, you're instructing, you're guiding them. They are your subordinates. But leaders and followers, these two words have to be in the same sentence. And then when you talk about influence process, some of the things that comes under is how do you influence it? First way to do it is just force someone. Yeah, you might just force your sales department to meet an unrealistic deadline, because sales departments in organizations they're always on the clock. Sales departments are always on the clock. They work very closely with HR. They work very closely with international business. They might work very closely with marketing because they have to. But the deadlines that they chase are usually very, very unrealistic. So they're always up and running, out and about. So what you can do is, instead of sort of making the process participatory, because you simply don't have the time to have a leader who is willing to sit down and listen to the salespeople, but rather they're just going to force. So you can actually influence by forcing them, coercion. That's the first word. Second is manipulation, which tends to take longer, because you have to understand the psychology of the followers, not just give them a direct order, which has to be sort of carried out. Third is the level of authority. If it's coming from your line manager, typically it's a top-down approach, because you just carry out, conduct a particular activity that was allocated or given to you. Fourth one is persuasion. I think the word persuasion is very often associated with the word influence. So that's critical. And typical types of leadership behavior is they're instrumental. It's a means to an end to get the job done, but also at the same time supportive. One of the things that good leaders have over the past, since the planet was born, since the concept of leadership was identified, is not just to have IQ, intelligent quotient, but also to ensure the leaders have the right amount of EQ, emotional quotient. So if you don't understand the people, forget about influencing them or having any sort of power over them or even getting the work done, because you just don't know your audience. So EQ, emotional quotient, is as important as intelligent quotient. So some leaders or some individuals, I'm sure you have come across them in your life as we are speaking at the moment. Some individuals they don't even have to be a leader. They might have a very high IQ, but their social skills, their people skills, the social skills, how they communicate with others, with stakeholders, are not very smart. That doesn't mean this person is not smart, very high IQ, but the EQ level or the EQ index is low, which is a bit of a problem really for some departments, because that's equally important. And we tend to ignore them by a large extent. And I think one of the things that universities also, or higher education institutions, or education institutions, broadly speaking, should be also focusing on is not just to develop your hard skills, which you get as a byproduct of spending your time at the university, or you could develop your hard skills by work experience, any sector of your choice, but also at the same time how you communicate with people. So that's why we have got so many group works, and you've got course reps, you've got team leaders, you've got all sorts of opportunities, if you look at them like that, that allows you to develop these people and communication skills. Because in the end, that's what matters. That's what's going to make you stick in an organization. You might get in the organization because you've got a fantastic CV, or somebody wrote a really good recommendation letter for you. It's all good, but how long are you going to stick there, and whether you're going to be successful in the organization would really depend on your human skills, or some might say soft skills. So communication, people skills, social skills, these things matter. Understanding each other, working with each other, and also supporting each other, not just as a means to an end, but making it a bit more human. The process has to be a bit more human in the end. And the last point here on the slide, if you're looking at the leader emergence versus leader effectiveness, how do leaders actually emerge? What is the requirement? Do they step up by themselves, or do they step up as per requirement or sort of necessary when they're appointed? Or you can just step up as a leader because your nature has leadership elements in it, which is a huge plus, of course. So moving forward, some of the approaches in leadership, I would like to introduce you to them. The first one is the trait approach. You might remember, if you go back to the lecture that I gave on entrepreneurship, I also gave you some of the approaches towards entrepreneurship historically, since 18th, 19th century. Similarly, for leadership, there are several approaches how academics, how markets, how the subject discipline on leadership have understood the concept over time. So the first one is the trait approach. And I don't know if you've read anything from Thomas Carlyle, a very famous writer, commented that the history of the world was the biography of great men. I think that's just a very nice line. And some of the features, the traits basically means features, individual characteristics or features. And some of them are here. If you look at the first bullet point, personal attributes. So for example, high energy level, tolerance for stress, not just to absorb stress, but better stress managers, better time managers. Emotional maturity, as I was saying, the EQ, emotional quotient, level of integrity, necessary self-confidence, otherwise just forget about guiding others if you're not confident enough about yourself, but also the sense of determination and a clear vision. One of the problems that you will come up with when you start working, and even when you're working together at the university, is the problem with sharing the vision, because instructions can be shared, a plan of action can be shared, but if you've got a vision, how do you ensure that other person can also see that exactly the way you do? And that's critical. That's a skill that you can develop over time with the help of others, but also by yourself. And to have that vision, and also to have the ability to share the vision with your followers, is a very important and critical trait that individuals might have if they are a good leader. But also you need, besides having some personal feature, it's just not having the resources, but also the ability and the mindset to go and use it. So it's the same as if you got the resources and not using it, it's the same as not having it. It's the same as somebody else who doesn't have the resources because you're not using it. So here, one of the things that triggers or boosts the potential of your resources is the level of motivation. And you've got internal motivation factors and also external motivation factors. So here, some of the theories, for example, I've just sort of made the name of the author in bold. You can see McClelland's. So you can just search McClelland's motivation theory. You'll come up with 3 different things that this particular author identified, which motivates leaders, motivates individuals. You don't have to be a leader necessarily. So the first one is need for power, to have power, to exercise power, to experience and realize power. Second is the dying need for achievement. So you're chasing for a particular outcome, and that's sort of that fulfills your needs. So more you achieve, more you want, and you set newer goals after that. So sense of achievement is good, but also at the same time, you need to achieve some of your goals. That sort of achievement gives you a little internal push, psychological push to push forward. Third one is a sense of affiliation. So what sort of company you're keeping, what sort of association you have, and so on. So just have a look at this particular theory and see how this particular author identified some of the motivation factors for leaders. What pushes them, what drives them forward, and also involving others in the process, which is a huge plus. Winning alone and winning with others, I think there's a bit of a difference there. You will experience when you like to win with others, you achieve a higher sense of purpose than just doing it for yourself or by yourself. And the third one is leaders tend to have a set of technical, conceptual, and interpersonal skills. And as you grow up, as you mature, as you start working later after you graduate, first few years, I think what you will really have is try to develop the technical and interpersonal skills. But with experience comes conceptual skills, which is the necessary set of skills for senior managers. Otherwise, because they're dealing with people all the time, not just with technical expertise or extraordinary communication skills. At some point, they are just not enough. That's one reality. So trait approach looks at these three focus areas: personal attributes, motivation, and skills. Moving on, the second approach is the behavioral approach, which is equally popular. And the fundamental goal here of this particular approach, which sort of emphasizes what leaders actually do on the job. Yeah. So are you making good relationships as you are progressing with your colleagues? Or you're just very much task focused, you're very much results focused or goal focused, and all that matters is how do I get from point A to point B, and I need to set a team. They need to go along well with each other. It doesn't really matter if they're going along with each other, or even it doesn't even matter much if I'm going along with them that well either, because what really matters is to get the job done in the end. So if that's the sort of behavioral tendencies, you can say that's the task-focused approach. So that's sort of a behavioral that you develop. So results is all that matters. On the other hand, you might think that let me build a solid team. Let me nourish and nurture a very good culture in the organization. Let me build some really good relationships with colleagues, just to try to create an environment where people would like to work together with each other and they would like to support each other. And so obviously the leader-follower relationship also improves over time. And that is a very much relationship-oriented approach. So the goal is there. It's not just you forget your ultimate goal. That's there. It's how do you get there? What is the process you're going to take? What is the road that you decide to embark on? So the first approach is relationship-oriented. This is the second one. And the other one that I said is very much task-focused. So the job, the result matters above everything else. Human relationships are it's a secondary thing to consider. So I'm just giving you some examples here. Identification of behaviors related to leadership effectiveness. For example, what people do and the outcomes, though conflicting evidence. Google typically has got a democratic leadership style where everybody is encouraged to participate with one another. There's a heavy emphasis on teamwork because every single innovation project is developed in teams. The idea might be somebody's, just one person, but the journey from idea generation to commercialization or monetization, as you will put it, that's collective. So it might start as an individual thing, but then end up as a collective outcome. And then so Google, you've got democratic approach, but then Hyundai, you might know this already from my second lecture, it's typically very autocratic. Do not forget the cultural context also. This is a Japanese company where hierarchy and the power distance, you might remember from Hofstede's cultural dimension factors. There were 6 factors. One of them was power distance. That was the first one, actually. So culturally, the power distance is very high in Japan. So typically, the consequence can be felt at the organizations originating in those countries where the power distance is high. Therefore, the typical leadership style at Hyundai is autocratic. But both of them are successful. And that's something that I want you to take away. It doesn't matter what is the approach. There is no right or wrong as such. You might also argue leadership behavior or leadership approach depends on some of the situational factors, cultural factors. In the end, what is the effectiveness of the leadership style? Are the companies successful? Do you think more people would like to work for these companies? Do they have a good reputation? Do they have an international name that actually means something? Do they have a strong competition because they're doing their job well? And so on. So all these things are sort of measures of your success. So one way to look at individual leaders' effectiveness, and on the other side, you can also measure the leaders' effectiveness by looking at the companies and the organization's success. Moving on, just to go a little bit further into the behavioral approach, how do you classify behavior? And as I was saying, the task-oriented and people-oriented. So some textbooks will say people-oriented, others will say relationship-oriented. And this was originated at the Ohio State University, where researchers came up with this particular finding that there are two typical types of behavioral approaches, relationship and results-focused or task-focused. But also at the same time, you can see the second bullet point, Uckel, Wall, and Lefsinger, 1990, they came up with 11 very generic categories of leadership behavior. And I read the original study. It's actually online. You can download it and just give it a read. They came up with these 11 set of roles sort of that classifies a typical leadership behavior. So it includes managing conflict and team building, which is a part of your leadership role, motivating others, recognizing and rewarding properly and on time. This includes recognizing talent and knowing the best way to utilize or leverage the talent, not just use individuals as a means to an end, but also how to nurture and nourish the talent so that they can expand over time. Similarly, one of the essential features of leadership is problem solving. That's something that they do on a daily basis, which is why the way their salary or pay works is quite different than how middle management or junior management gets paid, because the environment that they work in is far more complex. Some of the decisions are cross-stakeholder based, not just one or two day-to-day problems, but some of the major conflicts coming from the top. Let's say you've got a threat from the government or a threat from one of your competitors who have stolen your intellectual property, or somebody has sort of stolen your copyright or something of that sort, which doesn't really have a light switch solution. You need to go through a whole set of process with a lot of people in order to sort of resolve the crisis. And that's one area where leaders also take a behavioral approach, because it involves working with people. But at the same time, it's not just about you, or it's just not you all the time. You have to empower others in the process, because you have to develop others. You have not just motivate them, but also empower and develop their capability, not just capacity, but also capability. It's not just about what you can do, what your skills are, but how much you can achieve. What is your long-term capability? What skills can further develop and enhance? And by giving new responsibilities to others, that's how you empower them. That's how you delegate some of your roles to others and see if they can do it better, or let them make mistakes, which is an accepted fact. But in the process, you guide them and they grow as a process. And so do you. As you mentor, as you teach, as you instruct others, as you develop others, you also develop as a consequence, which is a huge plus at the individual level, plus of course at the organizational level, as we can see here. So moving on further, these two words I was mentioning in the very beginning, power and influence approach. And I talked a bit about influence already in the beginning, but there are three sort of discussions in this area which comes up very often, that how power and influence is exercised. So we understand what is power, what is influence, and the difference, but also how the use of power and influence is sort of experienced by organizations, by individuals. How is it practiced by individuals? So the three major topics. First is the power and leaders' effectiveness. So having power, what sort of benefit do you have? How do you exercise the power? What sort of power do you have? Is it an expert power, that you know something very well, which gives you a sort of an expert power, because people will have to go to you, or people will come to you in order to get the answers, because you've got an expert knowledge in that subject? Or you might have a very strong referent power. That's another way of exercising it. So the kind of power that you have, the type of power, the different sources of power, not just the types of power. Where do you get the, what is the source of your current power and how do you use it? And what good is it of? What good does it make in the end? Second one, in the sense of power and influence, is the LMX theory. LMX is very simple. It's just a shortcut name for leader-member exchange. Leader-member exchange. As you scroll through this PowerPoint, you will come across some of the slides on LMX I've provided for your revision. Just have a look at how it works. And there are different ways of, different sort of, not just ways, but there are different tactics, how you can influence others, how you can influence your followers, how you can influence organizations, and a particular situation for that matter. So these are some of the three topics when you talk about power and influence. So moving on, some of the other, as I was saying, the different types of power, and then there are also three sources of power and final consequences of power, outcomes of power, if I may put it that way. Now, I'm just going to take about 20 seconds break to switch on the lights in this particular lecture theater, because very soon you will be hearing just my voice. I'll be back shortly. It's very interesting. I was lecturing at a place. It was actually a workshop in Vienna, in Austria, where it was a summer camp on entrepreneurship that I was delivering. It was summer, it was July, and we had classes outdoors in the garden, so not necessarily indoors. I hope this university also thinks of something innovative, something similar. So getting back to power and influence, so there are 5 types of power. One of the things is if you're rewarding somebody and the reward itself gives a power. So it could be a financial reward, it could be a psychological reward, or you could say that, you know, this team needs to achieve these goals in the next 6 months, then I'm going to promote them, or I'm going to send them abroad to a particular branch of my company, international branch, so that they get to learn and develop and experience a new culture, working experience in a different culture, which is a plus in their personal and also intellectual level. But also the second type of power is coercive. If you're forcing somebody to do something because you got the power and they're bound to listen, simply because of the fact that you hold a position that is instrumental in the organization. Also, as per the hierarchy, if you look at the example of, just look at the example of Hyundai. The Hyundai example that I just gave a couple of slides ago, if it's a very autocratic type of leadership, aggressive style of leadership, coercive or force actually works. And people are bound to do this because you have been instructed by your line manager, and the leadership style is not participatory. Therefore, no other option. Third is this legitimate power, which can be a bit more innate, doesn't have to be coercive. Fourth one is expert. If you are an expert in your field or in the organization, you're really good at, let's say, data mining, or you're an expert on big data, you can write programs, you can design artificial intelligence. And so therefore you've got a demand, and people will do what you ask them to do, because everything that they need in your area, you are the solution, in-house solution. They don't have to look outside of the organization. So that gives you some sort of power. And similarly, if somebody is really good at strategic marketing, you've got a bargaining power. So people will listen to you, and also you can get things done because it's easier. They will listen to you because of your expert power. That's the source of your power, your expertise or specialization. And the fifth one is reference. So just give it a quick brush. I mean, I've just referred to French and Raven. This article was first published in 1960. I can't remember, it was in Harvard Business Review or Wall Street Journal, but there are millions of articles written on particular these 5 types of power, and there are 7, 8 different types of power now, as people understand it. Just do some research, because you might need this for your second coursework also, and try to see what are the sources of power. And if power is something that interests you, which source would you be going for? Which one do you think gives more satisfaction? Not just experience power, but which source of power is more sustainable for you, and how you're going to make it work for others. Because leadership is always about others, not for you in the end. And finally, the 3 outcomes of power. First is you get commitment from your followers. Second is you get compliance. That means people just abide by the instructions, abide by the guidance. Third outcome of power is your followers might actually resist you. So there's a bit of a friction So they might not actually accept your leadership for something or the other. It could be for ethical reason. The leader is trying to force something in the organization, and that is just not right on moral or ethical grounds, and employees might just revolt for that. Or it could be personality differences or lack of expert power and so on. So generally, the three types of outcomes that is experienced in the end, and they are, generating commitment, ensuring compliance, and facing resistance. So I hope this is sort of new for you. I'm assuming. So just go for it and do some research and see if you can find some other types of power. So if you do, you can always email me so you can have a discussion about that. And I think that's something that I've always talked about in the past few weeks, that just don't make it monotonic. This is not just a lecture and the seminars that follow, but also it's a discussion that we are having every week on topics. Every week you get a different topic, but in the end, it's sort of giving you an overview of the business management subject discipline. So if you do come up with some research, if you find some fascinating results or research papers or independent, sort of magazine or reliable source, come and talk to me, or your seminar leader. So that would be a good discussion. Otherwise, it's just an activity, finishing the activity and just going home. We need to have a discussion also. That's how we grow. And I suppose that's one of the purposes of the university, to develop you, not just to get good grades and attend classes. So the third one is the leader-member exchange, which is the LMX. And I think I mentioned this a couple of slides before. And it's really just a very simple concept. And I just am introducing you to this because there are lots of research papers written on this. Fundamentally, this emphasizes the nature of the relationship between a leader and his or her subordinates. That's it, really. So it's a leader-member exchange approach or theory. And leader differentiates subordinates by, first of all, their level of competence and their degree of skills, but also to the extent which they can be trusted. It depends on personality, but also it depends on how long have you been working for the organization, or how long have you been working with this particular leader in the context, and what is the definition of trust in a society. That also matters significantly. Third one is the motivation to assume greater responsibility, and it should come from both sides, the leader and the follower. So if the leader if the leader believes in you and constantly gives you new tasks and responsibilities because they think that you can actually develop and grow by doing this from time to time, which is a noble objective, but at some point you might realize that I'm being overburdened. I don't need this much responsibility at this time of my life. I might want to go slow. Some people might see some specific abilities and skills in you that you may have failed to recognize just yet. So in that case, sometimes some conflicts might also arise. But again, end of the day, it's a matter of motivation, whether you have the motivation or the right mindset, because motivation affects mindset and the other way around at the same time. Whether you have the mindset or motivation to assume or take on greater responsibility and do more, not just for yourself, not just for organization, but also others who are working with you. Because growing together or developing together or winning together has got a higher essence, a higher meaning than doing it all by yourself. It's more rewarding in the end. Moving on, continuing with the leader-member exchange theory, there are different relationships that people can create at workplace. It's natural. It's not something that you plan for necessarily. You might aim for it, but not necessarily plan for it, because there are people involved. This is not a technology human situation that you can plan perfectly, and as expected, you're going to get a specific result. But the type of relationships that you will experience at workplace, the sort of relationships that leaders develop with each member of their work group. So there's in-group, that's number one, in-group, or the high quality relationship where some of the followers are very close with the leader. So they are always working together, they're getting constant feedback, which is absolutely essential, getting feedback on a constant basis, formative feedback, constructive feedback. So therefore, they assume greater responsibility because they're constantly in touch with the leader, and they're given more responsibility from time to time than others because they're close. Also, the level of satisfaction is higher because, as I said, if you're getting constant feedback to how to develop, how to be better than yesterday, that's a huge plus for you and your community. On the other hand, you've got out groups. There are individuals, members who by intention or unintentionally end up in the out group. And these individuals typically tend to be at a distance from the leader. So they're not really working with them, nor do they have a very strong relationship with them. So in that case, they're sort of cut off. As I said, it's intentionally or otherwise. Therefore, as a consequence, they get less responsibility because they're just not visible. In the end, they're not getting direct response from the leaders or feedback. Therefore, chances of growth and development also sort of is limited. It's not there, it's just slow and limited. Therefore, the level of satisfaction is also low. So there are two types of relationships that you can experience at workplace. First is in-group leader-member exchange situation, and the out-group leader-member exchange situation. So that's it pretty much. And the way you enter, there are different mechanisms how to enter, how to be a part of the in-group. So you've got personal contribution. Do you step up to be a leader, or do you step up to take on new responsibilities from time to time? So there's a level of personal contribution that can be identified in the process. And what is the effect in the organization? Professional respect that you have to earn, not just because you're a leader or you're the general manager, but there's certain degree of respect that you have to earn over time as you work and develop with others. And of course, needless to say, it's the element of loyalty as you develop for the organization, also the loyalty that you receive from your followers if you're the leader. So moving on further. So I was saying that there are different types of influence tactics. So let me just go back to remind you where we are at the moment so far. So we looked at the LMX so far here. This particular set, power and influence. We looked at LMX and then looked at the effectiveness of leaders in different situations. And the third one was influence tactics. How do you ensure that you can change personalities, attitudes, behavior, belief system, and approach of others, which is pretty deep, but also quite rich. So there are different ways of tactics. I'm not going to get into this because this is a huge subject area. We could spend weeks just to explore and understand tactics better compared to how much we know today. But just have a look at this particular slide and see where and how you could influence others using some of these tactics. It could be consulting with others. You might make inspirational appeals, no thanks to YouTube or YouTube and social media. There's social media influencers. I mean, whatever that means. So traditional literature doesn't really capture that meaning as we understand that. Are you a social media influencer? So maybe it's good for business, but fundamentally, unless you're a brand yourself, it doesn't work. So you might become a brand because of your expert power or referent power. So that's why power and influence are sort of connected with one another. So they cannot be studied independently. Or you can make a motivational speech because some of you were quoting Simon Sinek the other day. Apparently he's big on YouTube and said a few things which actually make sense and other things that doesn't make much sense at this stage. But you can always go for motivational speaking because they inspire you. They sort of inspire you to go a bit farther, go that extra mile to achieve one particular goal that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do by yourself. But then other influence tactics could involve just pressurizing a community to do something, or sort of coalition tactics or exchange. So you can research a bit more on this. So just the way you have noticed over the past few weeks, the way I've designed the PowerPoint slides, it's not just to sort of ensure that you memorize them or remember all of them, but just to give you ideas about the current literature, what sort of models, theories, and sort of these are also in the results of different theories proposed by authors. So just to be aware. So I just want you to be aware of all this literature that's out there, and you can always research more. So some of you might be interested more in influencing tactics. Some of you might be interested, how do I enter the in-group in the leader-member exchange theory? So all these slides are for you to sort of swim through and research the topics that interest you the most. And then there are lots of literature out there that you can access for free today. So that's a plus. So continuing with our journey with the next slide. Yeah, okay, we're stuck for a while. So the fourth approach is the situational approach. And this is something that I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture today. And it's not just about the type of leadership or the sources of power or the influence tactics that you're going to implement in order to get a job done or to get a set of objectives in front of your followers. But some of the situational factors also plays a big role. So it could be, example, nature of work performed, what is the industry that you are currently engaged in, the general attitude of your subordinates or followers. All this also shapes the way some of the decision making is done, and also what sort of leadership approach is taken on by individuals or by leaders. So one of the theories here is, in this particular concept, the context of situational approach, the path goal theory. And what it basically says that it sort of emphasizes the importance of telling followers what behaviors are needed in order to attain desired outcomes. If you want to get from point C to point D, what are the deliverables at the personal level? And usually it's given by a leader who is experienced in that area and have gone through that particular journey herself or himself, and speaking from experience. And it's also important to have leaders who have failed in the past, not just 100% successful, because if you've been 100% successful, you have learned very little. You know the ways that works for you, for those cases where you have succeeded, but at the same time, you do not know much about the things not to do. So some of the easy mistakes that an organization might do unconsciously is because they're trying to do a similar set of market action that they undertook in a different market 2 years ago, and then try to replicate the same set of decisions and action in another market, and it might just not work. So path goal theory is fundamentally it's about what sort of behaviors are needed from the follower's side. And the publication of House in 1971, I think it's a seminal piece of work. I don't know if you know the meaning of seminal piece of work. Means the work that has stood the test of time. So something that was published way back in 1930 might still be relevant today in a particular context. So that's a seminal piece of work. So this publication by House, and originally published in 71, is still quite valid. It's a very interesting paper. You can dig up and start reading. Last year, I also published a paper which was looking at how employees are motivated. It was on employee motivation. And I also used this particular theory to further my research data. So it's quite useful. Path goal theory is quite popular and sort of relevant today. So again, for path goal theory, we've got some of the styles, leadership styles that we look at. First is directive. That's the first stage. Directive generally means that you don't really have a solid relationship with your followers just yet. So directive leadership generally takes place where in a particular situation where they don't really know much about each other. That's number one. Second is they are not fully aware of their strengths and weaknesses. Therefore, they don't know how the compatibility is going to work. So it's very much task focused. So you know the instructions, you know the goals, and you just go and sort of do it. So, second one is supportive. You sort of getting to know each other a bit more. Third is you're not just knowing them, but also welcoming views and opinions and ideas from them. That's the participative approach. This is third style of behavior. And the fourth one is achievement oriented. But here, I've just made a few more points in the second bullet point. Leaders can influence subordinates' perception of jobs. As I said, if you talk about influence, it's not just about changing the outcome, but also changing the perceptions, the beliefs, and the attitude, the behavior. So they can do that by, first of all, removing obstacles from path to desired goal, guiding them how to do it, not necessarily doing it for them, but showing them or guiding them how to do it by themselves. Second is rewarding goal attainment. So in organizations, you've got carrot and stick. Carrot means you get a reward if you do something particularly well, you get awarded, or simply put, rewarded. Or if you do something wrong or you break some rules, you get a stick, which is a punishment. But at the same time, it's important to recognize talent and reward people from time to time because there's a psychological effect. So the reward doesn't even have to be monetary or financial necessarily. It might be just a word of acknowledgement, just a word of appreciation, just to show that you can have a sense of belonging with the organization. And it should come from the leader because that's where the value is. It's good to get acknowledgement and appreciation from your colleagues, from your peers, or at the same time, if it comes from your line manager, somebody who is a superior level in the hierarchy, it just adds more value than others, because after all, you're working with and sometimes for your line manager. And the third one is helping clarify paths to goals. So there are different ways that you can achieve the objective. And if one way doesn't work, there should be other alternatives that could be guided by leaders. And it's not easy. Definitely, it's not easy for each industry. The influence tactics differ, and the path goal theory itself, it has got its own limitations. But broadly speaking, if you are taking one of these styles of behavior, then you can decide which one would be your influence tactic. So there's quite a bit of literature on there, just to understand that. Fifth one is transformational leadership. I'm just going to keep this short because there's been so much written on this particular topic that I could just go on. But putting it simply, leading by example. Leading by example. Some of you might say that you are inspired heavily and deeply by Sir Richard Branson, a person that you've never met, or you had no direct association with. You're probably never used in the past anything from Virgin, the company that he created. But also, you are inspired simply because of the things that he's done, his life example, the steps that he has taken as a consequence of his life in action. So leadership is a process of inspiring a group to pursue goals and attain results. That's the definition of transformational leadership. And the key word when we look at transformative leadership or transformational leadership, both are okay, is the idea of idealized influence. That's the idea. So just to push you a little bit farther, I've given you a reference just at the bottom, Loe Craig and Shiva Subramaniam. This paper published in 1986 talks about the whole idea of idealized influence. And I think this is a great way to understand transformational leadership. When somebody says leading by example, is it all about following somebody else's story, looking at their success steps and the sort of their life journeys where they've failed and learned? Or is there more? How do you get appealed? How do you get inspired by somebody who you have never met personally? Just by looking at the results in life, you are full of inspiration. So give it a read. This particular paper, I think, particularly if you're interested in leadership, then you get to know a little bit more about transformative leadership. And I'm saying this because earlier today I was marking some presentations for level 6, and it will be level 6, very soon. Time really flies on campus. Trust me, I've seen several campuses in my life, and they were levels. They're doing presentations, and today, so each student chose a different leader for their coursework. So each student presented on, we had historical figures like Alexander the Great, Abraham Lincoln, Julius Caesar, to Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Sir Richard Branson. And majority of them chose a leader who they believed had a transformative personality. So their focus was very much on transformational leadership. And it was interesting just to see the importance of idealized influence. I'm not going to disclose the literature that much yet because it's quite a lot. But do some research and see what you can find on the concept of idealized influence. I've just made it italics. You can see the very last line, sentence of this particular slide. So that's the transformational leadership. And then we've got the next one is charismatic leadership, which is mainly about impression management, clear articulation of appealing vision, communication of very high expectations and very clearly, because that's one of the areas all of us need a little bit of polishing. If you've got very high expectations or very high goals set, at the same time, you have to make sure the communication that you're having with your followers or colleagues, it has to be systematic, it has to be clear. That's essential. Otherwise, the meaning gets lost in the confusion. Fourth one is expression of confidence, because it's not just about your confidence, but also you're inspiring confidence in others. And it's great. It's just people take different. I mean, you could take the example of charismatic leadership from media, from arts, from music, from sports, not necessarily from other leaders that you have already used in our seminars. So if you've got a charismatic leader, a singer of your choice, I don't know what sort of music you listen to, but I'm sure your playlist is full of very inspiring singers. Some of them like to do their work solo by themselves, or you might be liking a band in particular, a music band. But regardless, music affects the way we think, the music affects the way our brain functions, and also music affects our mood. And that's for certain. Research has proved it, you have felt it, and we have experienced it. So that's a fact. So the change in mood when you listen to someone talk, or listen to someone singing, or watch somebody at sports. That's sort of adds up to this personality, and you can just always assign them this particular attribute that they are charismatic leaders. But at the same time, it's not always good. There might be some negative charismatics also. So they might be using their charismatic leadership for all the wrong reasons. So you have to be aware and not get blindsided, which happens a lot also in different markets. That's why I think it's a good idea if you are doing some research on leaders who were there in the past rather than who are still alive. Because if they're still alive and you make them your idol, and then 6 months later something happens, maybe a scandal of their organization or their personal scandal, it might change the way you perceive them. It might change the way they were motivating you until this point, because your whole world might shift. So yes, find your idol, believe in the leaders and some of the things that they say and do, but at the same time, keep your own eyes and ears open. So just be more conscious, just be more mindful for your own sake. That's critical. Okay, so the seventh style of leadership is transactional leadership. And again, it's got the connection with the LMX, the leader-member exchange theory. Fundamentally, it's an exchange between leaders and followers and need to satisfy both parties. Do your work, get paid, get your rewards, or come to an agreement, negotiate, get a good deal, get the job done. So there's not much charisma or transfer. You don't really have to have a charisma or a transformative personality to get the job done with these followers, because it's more like a contractual relationship, the contractual relationship between the leader and the follower. But then again, you've got contingent rewards and consider contracts of employment. How and when might there be problems? It's a very contingency approach involved. Now, before moving on, I would like to introduce one, well, not really introduce, but sort of remind you one of these things that you've discussed in the seminars in the past 7-8 weeks. Take a moment. It's quite hard to realize sometimes that it's already week 9. We're heading to week 10 next week. So I just hope that sometimes you go back and look at some of the old lecture slides and seminar activities that you've done, because they're all connected, as you can see. And one of the things that we discussed when we reviewed motivation, employee motivation, was the importance of having a psychological contract. So sense of security. I'm sure you remember the Maslow's motivation theory, and that's where we introduced the concept of psychological contract. So it's not just about the pay, the salary, or the sense of security that you get physical or the workspace, but also the psychological security that you want to work there. You have to develop a sense of belonging, and these things help you to generate a level of commitment, towards the organization. You develop a sense of belonging to the organization. This is a big plus. Psychological contract is something that the organization and the employees need to have. Similarly, between the leaders and the followers, you need to have a very safe environment where you can go and talk, open up, seek guidance. If you're stuck, it's really silly to stay adamant and not ask for help from somebody who is out there with the right set of skills to guide you. You should just go up and talk to this person, and you might get guidance. So the leader also should have that sort of personality where it's convenient for others to go and approach them, get the right guidance. So that sort of environment, the safe, non-judgmental, and supportive factors also count. So this is a great work by Briner and Conway in 2003, and the publication was highlighting on the importance of psychological contract and why employers and leaders need to offer this to the employees and the subordinates. So that's the seventh one, transactional leadership. So we looked at transformative, we looked at charismatic, and then now we looked at transactional leadership style. Next time you come with a leader, by the way, or maybe you've got a favorite leader already, try to categorize them. What is their leadership style? Are they transactional, transformative, charismatic, autocratic, aggressive, democratic, and so on. Then the other one, number 8, is implicit leadership theory. This is a bit old. I mean, this publication was done initially by Phillips in 1982, not the company Phillips, but an author, a gentleman named Philip. And the idea is quite interesting, but it first surfaced way back in 1910, where the concept was individuals have an idea of what a leader should look like. They evaluate actual leaders based on this idea. So you've got sort of assumptions and sort of stereotype of how leaders approach walk the talk, their general attitude at work, the way they deal with employees. Are they distant or are they working close to one another? So that was one of the ideas initially. It's one of the oldest reference to leadership theory, which has changed a lot. It's pretty much like saying whether leaders are born or made. And the answer is both, really. There's millions of examples today. But I just wanted you to be aware of this theory also, not just the charismatic, transformative, and also transactional. And one of the biggest problems with implicit leadership theory is how do you measure it? How do you measure? Because you're already having a set of assumptions, what a leader should look like, how they should be working, or sort of you already got your evaluation criteria. And if the person doesn't match up, and then sort of the whole evaluation process falls off because there is no standard way of measuring your assumption, because it might change from one person to the other. There's no commonly agreed evaluation criteria for a leader, which is why this theory is no longer sort of used per se. But know that it exists. Okay, so towards the end, I'm just going to wrap up quickly here. Some of the issues that we have in leadership, like we already talked a lot about gender and leadership, which is why I'm not having a separate discussion in the lecture. But over the past 2 weeks, we talked about gender and leadership quite a lot. We looked at women entrepreneurs, we looked at women leaders, some of the cases, and how organizations are supporting women, getting them leadership appointments, not just managerial positions, and also some of their attributes, and why this is something that we are looking at today in particular, because there's a greater emphasis in some societies, and also globally. This is a hot topic. I think it's been going on for ages. But equally importantly, we look at equality, diversity, and inclusivity, which is something that everybody's talking about today. And that's something which leaders have to manage on a day-to-day basis. So I'm just giving you some information and data here, and just try to understand what these means and what sort of challenges leaders have to face in this particular context, and how do they overcome these challenges. The last bullet point, women experience more barriers in leadership, and there's quite a few case studies I had uploaded already on LMS, you will see, where I'm referring to glass cliff and glass ceiling, invisible barriers in the society which restrains women from progressing in the hierarchy. So how fast and how well you can rise up the food chain of the organization is something that is sort of calling for more research. So if you look at this particular article, Women Experience More Barriers in Leadership, by Linus and Thompson, published in 2000. It's a good article. It's not very long, but it will tell you some of the practical problems in the East and the West. So there's no sort of, there's no safe or better example where somebody is doing this perfectly. We have not reached that stage yet. We don't have that sort of infrastructure embedded in organizations. But in some countries, you will see, if you do some research, that there's a regulation that organizations need to have at least 25 to 33% of their workforce have to be women. So if it's a regulation, it's easier because it's easily enforceable. So companies have to do it. It's not an optional thing to consider anymore. But apart from gender, apart from diversity, you also got equality and also inclusivity. So including everybody, gender-wise and also merit-wise, culture, ethnicity, race-wise. Those are also important considerations. So towards the end, some of the new trends in leadership, how to manage a diverse workforce. The greatest challenge at the moment, as I'm delivering this lecture, is managing remote work, managing virtual workforce, managing or sort of leading employees who don't get to see you very often because you're all the time either on Zoom or on Tencent Video or Skype, or just the way we are communicating during our lectures, is managing remote work. And I have published quite a lot in this since March 2020, since the pandemic started. And as you might remember, your topic for the second coursework is also around this area. What are some of the leadership challenges during the pandemic? So it could be the companies sort of firing people a lot because their operations have been shut. Cultural problems, because it's easier to maintain an organizational culture when people are actually at the workplace, they're seeing each other, there's a supportive environment and so on, and the culture is sort of falling out, not necessarily falling apart yet, because you don't get to see them anymore. So there's lots of similar related problems that are coming up, apart from performance appraisal, maintaining the same level of productivity and effectiveness when you're working remotely. I'll sort of record a separate video just to support you with the second coursework a bit more. But that's one of the trends in leadership. If you just go online and search for leadership challenges during the pandemic, and you'll see what sort of articles you're coming up with. There's lots of literature from all over the world, which is going to enrich you further. But also, importantly, this is something that I personally believe in, that leaders are not only heroes, but also hero makers. That's your role. As I was saying, it's not about you. It's never about you. It's about others. If you're the leader, or if you're assuming the role of a leader, focus should be creating the next generation leader. So some jobs some individuals might take up is just to make sure that they prepare others so well that they don't need to be on the job any further later. So that's one idea. Just train others so well that you can be replaceable by the individuals that you trained and developed. Spend your energy, time, and value creation on. So finally, it is also worthy to note that age, personality, emotional competence, the EQ factor, social skills also equally, all have an influence on perception of successful leadership, as well as being supported by some empirical evidence to support. Lots of case studies, lots of, so don't always go for the obvious cases, the leaders that you already know much of because of social media and others, but also try to dig up. So try to dig out how the leadership for a small and medium enterprise, so many small and medium enterprises, even in Tashkent, just try to see how the leadership work for small and medium enterprise. How do they manage their employees? Is it significantly different than large corporations? Maybe. What is the culture of the small and medium enterprise? If it's a restaurant or other forms of small and medium enterprise, it could be a jewelry store, accessories, supermarkets. What is the culture of the organizations? How do leaders manage change, risk, culture, and also diversity in such environments? So don't always go for the obvious big corporations, because yes, there are lots of sources of information you can access rather easily, quickly, instantly. You will also be fed with lots of a range of misinformation and disinformation. But if it's a small and medium enterprise, something that you might be running in the future, it could be a boutique store, a fashion luxury textile store, or whatsoever it might be. Just try to see what is the sense of leadership in this particular context? How can be a leader for such scale of businesses, and how would you inspire others? What would be your behavioral approach? And also try to know a little bit about yourself. What are the traits you already have? Also the areas of improvement that you can work on in the future while you're at the university, while we are still together. For this particular module, come and talk to me. If you got any business ideas or any particular skills that you'd like to develop, because it could be qualitative skills, soft skills, or quantitative skills. So in accounting, finance, and so on. I'm very happy to have a chat, so I can guide you. I can point you to the right direction. You can go and develop yourself. And that's just a benefit for the society if we go and help each other out, and peer support really matters. So that's why I sort of appreciated your presentations. Again, this is already 3 weeks old and your marks are just about to be released. You liked that part of my lecture just now. The marks are just about to be released. But also what I really appreciated is your peer support. And I felt it not just for my seminar groups, but also other groups who are other seminar leaders who are conducting their presentations. And I've sat and listened to your presentations, and I really personally acknowledged the level of peer support that you provided each other. So keep it up. Don't change. Be better. Be stronger. Be more confident, and believe in yourself. Be a good leader. That's the end of this lecture, and I will see you around. Take care. Bye for now.